In the 10th century, there's a guy named Farabi. The Romans call him Farabius, or Al-Farabius, because the Arabs called him Al-Farabi. Farabi realized that he had a problem. He wanted to talk about everything and anything under the sun. He wanted no limits. He was a polymath. He wanted to talk about psychology and politics. He wanted to do astronomy. He wanted to do religion. He knew he was eventually going to step on somebody's toes, and he was going to get it. So what he did was he wrote all the books he wanted to, and then he put it in his will that when he died, they would get published. And so as a result, we don't really know as much about him because during his lifetime, he spent it as like a gardener. And what he would do is he would garden at the palace, and he would listen to all the political conversations inside, pretending that he's tending to the roses or something. But in reality, he was writing it all down. He's going to ask really strange questions, questions that maybe not many folks had asked before. So when the Persians made their empire, they did something completely unexpected, completely bizarre. When you would get conquered by Kurosh the Great or subsequent Persians, you weren't subjugated, enslaved. You became a partner of the empire. In other words, you were in a good place being conquered. It wasn't that horrible, which is strange because that's usually not how it is. In fact, Kurosh insisted on the diversity being held up. If you go to Persepolis, Takht Jamshid, if you go to Persia, I went in 2002. It's fantastic. Good luck getting a visa. It was a nightmare. I'll never try again. It's not going to happen. I give up. But if I could go again, I would definitely do it. When you get to Takht Jamshid, there's walls that show people in every kind of dress imaginable because it's a celebration of the nations. The Romans erected a monument to the massacre of the Dacians. I'm pretty sure that in Rome there is the only monument commemorating genocide. It's still there. You can go see it. It's in your art textbook. Your art history textbook, they show you the bottom parts. They never show you the top. Because the bottom parts of the tower show the Roman army getting together to go, and everybody's excited about that. At the top, it shows the genocide. The Arabs are like the Persians. They didn't reject the different cultures. They didn't reject the different religions. They embraced them and they accepted them. And they said, yeah, cool, keep doing your thing. If you want to convert, do it. In other words, this wasn't a forced empire like so many empires in our history. Al-Farabi asks a question, though, that throws everybody off. Because, so, if I say you're tolerant, that doesn't mean you love the other guy. We should be a tolerant society. That's a really low bar, right? Tolerant is, yeah, the world would be better if you weren't here, but I guess I'll tolerate you. That's not especially amazing when a person says, I'm tolerant of others. What I think would be really amazing is if you said, I really love others. That's a different level. And Al-Farabi asks that question, and he does it in a way that makes everybody uncomfortable. So the first two names of God, God has 99 names, Rahman Ar-Rahim, the beneficent and the merciful. And it's pure mercy, it's not human mercy, right? Where you surrender to me and I'm like, I could kill you, but I guess I won't. Not that, it's pure mercy. The 50th name is Al-Haq, which means the truth. Al-Farabi asks the most annoying question ever. If God is beneficent and he's merciful, then why on earth are only 20% of the world's population Christians, Jews, and Muslims? Because in Islam, right, it's built in that Christians, Jews, and Muslims can get to heaven. In fact, they expanded it to include Zoroastrians. What about the other 80%? Did God set them up to fail? It's not their fault that they don't know about the three Abrahamic religions. So is God condemning them to all eternity in hell? This is why he couldn't publish while he was alive. And then he goes, I have no choice but to believe that God gave Hindus Hinduism, and God gave Zoroastrians Zoroastrianism, and God gave Buddhists Buddhism. But if God is al-Haq, if he's the truth, he can't possibly have lied to them. Therefore, every religion must have access to heaven. Therefore, every religion should get equal respect. In fact, he went one step further and said, when you think about it then, the only way to truly know God would be to know every religion. He starts a whole movement. The Sufis go, oh wow, that's amazing. No bounds on what we can study. We can go learn yoga from India and bring it back. Al-Farabi wasn't just a polymath, he was a genius. And the way I can be certain in that statement was because of the following. So there's another Persian, his name is Ibn-i Sina'yı. Ibn Sina says to us that I read Aristotle 40 times. Now, he didn't read Aristotle 40 times. We actually don't know how many times he read him. I read Aristotle 40 times was an idiom. It meant I memorized Aristotle word for word. When he said I read Aristotle 40 times, what he meant was, you can tell me the politics, page 5, 3rd chapter, and he could tell it to you word for word. He had the text memorized in his head. He said, after saying this, I don't know what it says. I'm sure there's some incredible genius here. I can't tap into it. The words don't make sense. The reason the words didn't make sense was they were idiomatic. That is to say, Aristotle taught in idioms. Well, he taught in idioms that by the 1st century AD were now 1,000 years old. And even the Greeks didn't know those idioms. So it wasn't like the Arabs could go to the Greeks and go, dude, what does this idiom mean? Because the language had evolved and those idioms were forgotten. So whether you read it in the original Greek or you read it in Al-Kindi's translation, either way you still didn't know what the idioms meant. Nobody did. Even the Greeks couldn't read Aristotle. And so they're stumped. They don't know what to do. And Ibn Sina goes, I know there's a genius in here. I got to tap into it. How do I tap into it? One day he's in the book section of the bazaar, and he passes by a book. And it says, it's written by Farabi. It says, Al-Farabi's idiomatic translation of Aristotle. Al-Farabi would read an idiom, try to guess what it meant. He'd plug it in, see if it worked. If it didn't work, he'd come back, try a different one. And he kept doing this until he decoded the idioms. And he realized what each idiom meant. And now you could know Aristotle and what he was saying. Ibn Sina reads this, figures out what the idioms are. He already has the text memorized. Ibn Sina suddenly, instantly knows Aristotle. And he goes nuts. What he realizes is that Aristotle is on to something about the nature of the universe. So, Aristotle says, so I guess I have to tell you what Plato says. Plato says that there's 3 realities. There's the reality we experience. So this floor, that wall, the chair, my suit, me. But that's not the real real. The realer real is what's in my head. So my imagination of a chair is realer than an actual chair. My understanding of the wall is better than the actual wall. And he goes, but that's not the real real either. Reality exists in a plane of existence that he calls the forms, or the idios. And so what happens is, if I'm going to make a chair, my mind reaches up into the idios, grabs the true chair, brings it into my head, but it's a copy. Copy is never as good as the original. And then my hands take the copy in my head and make a physical copy. So the chair, that chair, is a copy of the real thing. Aristotle reads this and goes, oh my God, what a bunch of nonsense. What even is that? It's nonsensical. Aristotle says, no, the chair is a collection of essences. This chair is black, so it has black essence. It's plastic, so it has plastic essence. It's shaped in a specific way. It has chair essence. That a thing is a series of essences. Ibn Sina goes, those essences are actually information. For example, there might be a scratch on that chair. And then the shape of the chair itself is information. And the molecular construction, he didn't have the concept of molecules, but they did have the concept of atoms. The construction, the material in there, that's also information. But he takes it one step further. He goes, so when that chair was originally made, it was not perfect, but it was close to perfect because it probably didn't have any scratches on it. It didn't have any damage. It didn't have any wear and tear on it. But then, as time goes by, more information is added to the chair because it gets bumped and it gets scratched. In other words, there's a relationship between information and time. Take me, for example. When I was born, I was a lot easier to describe, in part because I was a lot smaller. But also I had fewer scars, and there was a lot less information in my head. So the description of me was really easy. But as time goes forward, the description of me becomes more and more complicated. Until finally, I die, and my cells break apart and decay back into the earth. The description of me becomes extraordinarily complicated at that point. In other words, as time goes by, the universe increases the amount of information. And then he goes, oh wow. What if we ran the clock backwards? So instead of us thinking about the future where there's more information, if we go back, there's less and less information. And he goes, okay, so at some point, we reach a moment where there's the minimum amount of information necessary for the universe itself to unravel from that moment. He calls that point in time and that information packet necessary being. In other words, 1,000 years ago, Ibn Sina described Big Bang and singularities and entropy. Also, that was not a major achievement for him. His real achievement was he's the guy who invented modern medicine. So if you look him up, it'll say the father of modern medicine. Some of you will get confused and go, I thought Hippocrates was the father of medicine. Yeah, because you're forgetting, I said modern, I didn't say medicine. I said modern medicine. Until Ibn Sina, medicine looked like this. There was disease, and the way disease affected you, it was based on, did you eat fish and drink milk? And did a black cat walk in front of you? Was Jupiter in alignment with Saturn? If so, when disease hits you, you're going to bleed from the eyes and have uncontrollable bowel movements. Ibn Sina walks up and goes, this is nonsense. What are you talking about? There isn't disease, there's diseases. They're all different, and they have different transmission vectors. So one disease, you sneeze on it, you get it. Another disease, you touch fecal matter and you get it. Another disease is bloodborne. Another disease comes by insects. Another disease comes from rats. In other words, what we need to do is we need to think about the transmission vectors. In his book, here you go, Kanun Tib. Kanun means law. Q-A-N-U-N. So if you're in physics and they say you need to read the canon, C-A-N-O-N, not C-A-N-N-O-N, means law because it's an Arabic word. You're using an Arabic word. Qanun is Q-A-N-U-N. It doesn't have to be, but that's how I'm spelling it. It could be with two O's or... So, The Canon of Medicine is the book he writes. In it, he includes hundreds of cures. We still use a bunch of those cures today. In Europe and the Middle East, his book is still necessary reading in medical school. But that's not what's interesting about him. Here's what he says. He says, you know what's better than all these cures I stuck in here? Prevention. Your goal is not to get the disease to begin with. If you cannot get the disease, that's way better than getting the disease, risking dying and getting cured, and then dealing with the side effects of the disease later. That's why he's the father of modern medicine. He's that guy who said, interrupt the transmission vectors. So when I was taught this in school, I was taught that Semmelweis, the Hungarian, figured this out. Yes, Semmelweis, the Hungarian, figured it out again 800 years after Ibn Sina figured it out first. Ibn Sina had a contemporary. His name was Ibn al-Haytham. Actually, for the record, neither guy was actually called Ibn Sina or Ibn al-Haytham. Their names were shockingly similar, and so it's hard to keep them apart. Abu Ali al-Hassan, Ibn Abdullah, Ibn al-Haytham, I think is Ibn al-Haytham, and then Abu Ali al-Hussein, Ibn Abdullah, Ibn Sina. So we just went, screw it, we're just going to use the last parts of their names, which is like their grandfather's name, and we're just going to reject the rest of it so that I don't have to remember which Abu Ali I'm talking about, and we can move on. So, Ibn al-Haytham was from Iraq, he was from Basra. He ended up, by the way, Al-Farabi actually was a student of Ishaq after Baghdad was created. That became the repository of knowledge. Baghdad was the center of it all. And Ishaq was a Christian Arab. And I just thought I'd throw that in there because I want to make sure that I didn't ignore the fact that this isn't just a Muslim project. This was also a Christian, and for that matter, there were Jews involved in this as well, because this was a tolerant society that embraced the differences and allowed them to thrive. And so Ibn al-Haytham goes to Cairo, and he starts working at Al-Azhar as a professor. Al-Azhar was a brand new school and mosque in a brand new city. Cairo is like the baby of the Middle East. It's only 1,000 years old, which is a joke for age, right? And everybody's like, oh, Cairo, so young. It's such a noob. And so Ibn al-Haytham was right there at the beginning, and he writes a book, which in 1021 is the Book of Optics. We think Ibn al-Haytham wrote 120 books. We have 30 of them. We're missing 90. Of the 30 that we have, they're almost all on mathematics. He was a mathematical genius. He started doing calculus before anybody. So, yeah, sorry, it wasn't Leibniz or Newton. It was Ibn al-Haytham. He's the guy who came up with the scientific method. So when I was a kid, I was taught it was either Galileo or it was Francis Bacon. Galileo maybe did something cool with cannonballs at the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I don't know. Galileo Galilei, I mispronounced his name. It's probably apocryphal. It probably didn't really happen. But if he did do the cannonball thing, that's all sorts of fun. Because you just say, look out below, and then he drops cannonballs. The reason he did it was he was trying to prove whether or not Aristotle's assumptions about the heavier object will hit the ground first was true or not. And of course, they saw the two objects hit the ground at the same time. He had a solid cannonball and a hollow cannonball. So if Aristotle was right, the solid one would hit first. And Aristotle wasn't right. Well, but he was kind of, but that's too complicated. We don't need to do that. It turns out it is true. The heavier object will hit first. It's just the cannonballs relative to the size of the Earth. Who cares? So the only way you can measure the heavier one hitting first is if you had lasers sophisticated enough to pick up the nanosecond difference between contact. In other words, if I had an object the size of the moon and an object the size of Mars, and I ran them towards the Earth, the Mars-sized object would hit first. But anyway, that's because of the way gravity works. So it was Ibn al-Haytham. He had a 6-step method for the scientific method. He's the guy who figured out the lens. I'm very grateful. Every day I wake up, I go, thank you. And I put them on. He reinvented the camera obscura. Lao Tzu invented the world's first camera obscura.